So you'll see a lot in the news at the moment about how many jobs are going to be destroyed by automation, how we're going to be subsumed by robots within the next couple of months, which is a bit troubling sometimes. So I put it to you that there's a scale of stuff that may happen, and we don't actually know where we're going to sit on that scale. So what's really interesting is the MIT Tech Review, about 6 months ago, compiled a list of all of the different predictions about the future of work. And some of them had absolutely catastrophic job loss. And some of them, using a different methodology, had more jobs being created. And all that tells you is that when all of the smartest people in the world sit down and try and work out what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, they haven't got a clue. And that means all we can do is start thinking about, what do we think is the general direction of travel? What do we think some of the opportunities might be? What do we think some of the challenges might be? And actually, how do we get our organizations slightly more ready to be able to shift or pivot or do things differently if things do turn out to be different scenarios? So the first scenario I'm going to describe to you is, it's up here, it's up this end. And this is the gorgeous utopian scenario where technology solves everything for us. It solves inequality, it solves for hunger, it solves for global warming, it builds your house for you. Everyone probably gets a universal basic income, so we all have a good standard of living, and everything's nice and lovely. Over on this side, you are all destroyed by Terminator-like robots. Now, you will regret having spent today here instead of with your family and friends, but this side, again, it may happen. I'm not here to talk to you about this, but it's probably not going to happen in the near future. What's interesting for me is this bridging thing in the middle. And this is the bit where it's a bit tricky, where you go, actually, even if we end up in a good place or a really bad place, we know that there's going to be some things changing over the coming years. And it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it will vary by sector and it will vary by country, but there are definitely some things changing. And the interesting thing about this bit is how we think through the complex interdependencies of the world and our economy. So one of the things that I hear is, well, you don't need to worry about job losses because there's going to be a massive demand for data scientists. But if you're a taxi driver made unemployed or redundant by the fact that you're being replaced by a self-driving vehicle, I very much doubt there's a flex of skills straight from driving a taxi to going, well, that's okay, or just go and get a job as a data scientist. It may work for some. I'm going to humbly suggest it's not going to work for all. In the US, there are 1.6 million long-distance lorry drivers. Currently, actually, there's a shortage. But if you play that forward a few years and you go, well, you don't need those drivers because you can have driverless fleets that are more fuel efficient, better for the environment, they don't need to sleep. It's very unlikely that those 1.6 million people will have the educational credentials, potentially the ability or social mobility to move into higher paid jobs. And that, at that point, becomes a societal problem, and quite a deep one. So at the moment, we have historically high levels of employment. It's good news. It may not feel like it for everyone, but we have historically high levels of people in work. But the challenge that we have is we also have high levels of people living in in-work poverty, struggling from one paycheck to the next, genuinely would struggle if unexpected bills came in. And that means that we have a very fragile economy. And that's before you take into account any other external shocks that may be caused by politics or any choices. We just simply have a fragile economy now. And the challenge that we have with that is that we're all interdependent. And it's very easy to take a step back and go, well, I think my job's going to be okay. And actually, if you work in HR, your job's probably going to be okay for quite a long while. Because if you're in any way except the most transactional bit of HR, you have expertise in things that involve human emotion, connecting, understanding the dynamics of organizations, understanding incentives and rewards, and they're quite complex things that require a bit of humanity. We're in a good space. But the challenge is we're all interdependent. And that means, for instance, if the retail sector is revolutionized by technology, and that would be involved, if you look at the Amazon business model that they appear to be evolving to, and they're certainly researching, that would be you speak into your Amazon Echo, and you go, Alexa, can I buy this? It's picked in a warehouse automatically by a robot, and it's flown into your back garden by a drone with no particular human interaction. If you displace jobs at volume, the challenge is who's going to buy all the other stuff? It's really that simple. Economics isn't more complex than that. We rise together and we fall together. If we drop levels of demand in the economy through people not having work, there is an interdependency, particularly in a fragile economy, where we struggle. And the other thing is just the nature of work is changing. And that's an interesting thing as well, because as we evolve, and again, it could be to either end, destroyed by robots or everyone very happy, and you can pick which one you'd rather it be. But as you move towards that state, and it's quite volatile, the nature of work is changing. The amount that we want to quantify or measure people in workplaces is changing. The amount of data that we want on people and their behavioral patterns is changing. If you went back 5 or 10 years, we were talking about the importance of autonomy in the workplace, treating people as individuals. Now we're doing our level best as a profession to leverage HR analytics because it gives us credibility, but actually we're sacrificing the concept of an individual within that. Because I never, at any point in my career, have sat down and gone, what I really want from this organization is to be a better HR analytic for them. I want to be a person. I want to be recognized for that. And actually, I want the organization to respond to that. So, quick check before we progress. Because I am talking about technology and I am talking about Terminators. Could you raise your hand, and I know it's hot, if you're a human being? Okay, so that's most of you. So that's a good start. I'm talking about very human challenges and probably at quite a broad level. And genuinely, there is less practitioner insight in this than anything else I talk about, but there's perhaps more relevance to anyone here who is a person or knows a person if you are a robot. So, Jurassic Park, a classic movie. The original one I'm talking about here, classic movie, needed more HR presence, is my take on that movie. I realized I didn't see that pop up in any cinema reviews at the time, but every time I watch the movie, I go, well, HR would have sorted that. So essentially what you've got is you've got an island with the dinosaurs on it, and they've got some people they can fly in by helicopter to check out that island. And what they do is essentially they bring in some paleontologists, experts in dinosaurs, good choice. They bring in some hunters, absolutely makes sense. You've got a giant T-Rex, can get really grumpy. And they bring in Jeff Goldblum as a mathematician. I'm not signing off that job wreck, right? I'm going, I'm sorry, I know you want it. Maybe next year if budgets hold up. But really, I'm gonna let you spend that money on a hunter. I think the film's over in 10 minutes if you do that. But Jeff Goldblum's character, Ian Malcolm, says a number of things in that movie. And I've written on this if you ever want to check it out. So connect with me afterwards. I'm at DDS180 on Twitter, or connect on LinkedIn and kind of read my stuff about Jurassic Park specifically. But he says one thing that's really pertinent to what's going to happen over the next few years. And it plays actually into the HR vendor space and HR tech space very clearly. He says you were too busy thinking about what you could do to think about what you should do. And the challenge we have in HR over the next few years is that you are going to get increasingly shiny technology propositions that can do more and more with more people's data in different ways. Smart things. And what we need to do is have enough restraint to be able to say, actually, but is that the right thing to do? Is that how I would want to be treated as a person? Is that how people that work for us would want to experience the relationship between us and them? Just because we can measure it, is that the right thing to be doing, or does that fundamentally change things? And we have a poor track record on restraint as a species. We're just not very good at it. And I appreciate it's not a very sexy word, right? It's not something that crops up very, you don't go, what will the HR practitioner of the future look like? Restraint. Like, it's not, it's not one of those words that everyone gets excited about, like agile. Everyone wants to be agile. No one wants to have restraint. But restraint's really important. So I'm going to ask a very personal question, and I'm going to ask you to share, honestly, if you can. So if you started a diet as part of your New Year's resolutions, could you raise your arm, please? It's amazing the amount of people that just look round to check. Whether you started a diet or not is not dependent on the person next to you. But that's a good example of, I guess, how it works in terms of human psychology. We look to what other people are doing. Could you raise your hand if you have not made a mistake on that diet, so you've flawlessly kept your plan since? Just give it a few more seconds. Not quite working. So, the reason that we don't keep to diets is because we are wired as human beings to not properly work out whether we should take short-term rewards, very immediate, or longer-term benefits. It's a concept called hyperbolic discounting. You see it with pensions. We all know that we should save for our pension, but we want to buy stuff now. We want to go on holiday now. And the reason that we diet badly is donuts. It's simply donuts. So you know that in 10 years' time, you will have wanted to eat properly now, but someone brings in a donut to the office. And you can't resist that donut. And then the next day, the remaining donut's still there, and you don't want the donut to go out of date, because that feels like that's unethical. And we're a very ethical profession. We have a responsibility to eat the donut. And then you've gone 2 days. And then actually, well, you've been bad with the donuts, you may as well have a bad week. And the challenge that we face is that some of the decisions that we need to make about what we want to do with technology as a society, the decisions we want to make about how we want work to be, require us to make decisions based on how we want to look at things in 10 years' time. And it is rare to find organizations or individuals with the discipline to stick to a plan for what things look like in 10 years' time. It's rare to find organizations that do the same thing at the end of the year as they plan to do at the start of the year. We spend half of our time writing, what are we going to do this year? Right, no, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, that didn't happen because, right, okay, well, that is life. But there are some things that have such profound impact that we need to find ways to come together to say, how do we want to be? And what will we need to change now? What steps will we need to make now to make sure that in 10 years' time, we haven't just been sleepwalking towards a result that we wouldn't want? Sleepwalking towards either large-scale unemployment or wealth moving in a way that we wouldn't want to be comfortable with, when we're all talking about the importance of inequality now. Moving towards situations where technology is, in fact, embedding bias or inequality in systems rather than releasing us from it. So you use an algorithm to profile the most successful people in your organization and go and get some more of them. What you're doing is essentially cloning some of the issues that you currently have. You are embedding problems within a system rather than stepping back and going, what are we trying to solve for here? And that's probably the biggest question of our time. What are we trying to solve for here? As an HR practitioner, what are you trying to solve for? As someone trying to make a difference in an organization, what are you trying to solve for? And in fact, business, increasingly, what are you trying to solve for? Do you believe that business genuinely has a social purpose and a social obligation? Or is it simply the fact that businesses are there to make money, and therefore anything follows beyond that point? And if you think that businesses do the latter, but you want that to change, then what would need to change in terms of regulation or consumer behavior to make that shift? And consumer behavior is another area where I think we need to be a bit more honest with ourselves about human psychology. So my guess is, if I'd asked people in this room 10, 15 years ago, what was most important to you about Britain's high streets? You would have gone, independent shops. And I want to shop ethically as well. Important things for me. Instead, what do? We buy from Amazon because they can deliver stuff the next day. It's a donut. It's the consumer's version of a donut. You might want to shop on the high street, and you might want to shop from your local provider, and you might want to support all those things, but your behavior directs you into a different place. And the only way we beat behavior is by structure, policy, agreement, or social pressure from other people, where we've committed to other people we're going to behave in a different way. So, don't have long here today, but I wanted to speak to you about 3 things we'd like the HR profession to be, and we will be calling out at the CIPD. There will be some bad jokes coming, hopefully a bad analogy as well, but hopefully some stuff that you can remember to take away. So the first thing that we're calling on people to be is more evidence-based. And by that we mean, could you raise your hand if you just have too much time in your working week? Not many people. So what we're trying to do is find ways for you to use that time efficiently. And that means spending a bit more time up front in terms of your planning, going, what's most likely to work in this situation? What do we know from research, experience? How well have we challenged our experiences before we kick off this project? We're not very good at testing that, I think, as a profession. So really bad joke coming. You don't have to laugh, particularly as it's hot. But you're walking down the street and you see someone sprinkling white powder in the road. And you go up to them and you go, excuse me, what are you doing? And they go, I'm sprinkling elephant powder. So you go, well, what's elephant powder? They go, it keeps elephants away. You say, well, there aren't any elephants around here. And they go, yes, it's brilliant powder. The challenge that we have in HR is that we get rewarded for that sprinkling motion. We get rewarded for doing HR-ish type stuff. And we need to step back a bit and go, actually, what is the cause and effect here? What is likely to be true? What's likely to really make the difference that we want it to? And that's the work we need to go after. We need to be principles-led. And going back to that Jurassic Park bit, that involves a bit of restraint, but it also requires bravery as a profession to step forward into difficult spaces and challenge organizations on a raft of things, whether it's executive pay, which can seem incredibly tough to challenge on internally, or whether, in fact, it's the standard or quality of the culture in the office environment, and whether people feel comfortable working in it. And the final thing that we ask people to be is outcomes-driven. So final bit of testing for you before we kind of wrap up. So has anyone here been locked out of their house in the last year? Could you raise your hand if you've been locked out? So you're not sure. This is like 15. Did anyone need to use a locksmith? Anyone to get back in? What did you want from that locksmith? What kind of things? When you called the locksmith, you were like, I need you to do this. If it could get you in like the house. As quickly as possible? And not break the door, I guess? Okay, so remember that. These are our objectives. Get me in as quickly as possible and don't break the door. If you get an inexperienced locksmith, what happens is they turn up to your house. It'll be quite an effort for them to try and get into the door because they're still learning. And there's a high chance that they will break the frame of the door or do some damage to the lock, and you'll need to pay for those replacement parts as well. Scenario 2 is you get a really experienced locksmith, and they pop up and they just go, da-da, and you go straight back in. Which one do you resent paying? It's the one who turns up and does it effortlessly. Because we think about output and outcomes in the wrong way. We equate it still. We get them mixed up between hard work, which is your inputs over here, and your outcomes. The difference that you've made. What were you trying to do? I spent the last year encouraging my team to try and be more lazy. And when I say lazy, I'm asking them to put in fewer hours, but be smarter about the way they do it. And it's been a really interesting thing to watch. And it reached the point where I had to say, look, when it comes to your pay review next year, if I've caught you consistently late at the office, and yes, I realize the hypocrisy, I'd have to be there too. But if I've caught you working late on a regular basis, we know that's less productive over time. So I don't want you doing that. And when you put that pressure on, what I find is they're more inventive. They find ways around broken systems. They don't tolerate work just being done in the same way. They create new ways of doing work. And that's what you get if you get really focused on that outcomes-driven piece. Because you're not focusing on, did you work late last night? Good job. You're focused on, actually, are you getting the work done? And is there a more elegant way of doing that work? So Bill Gates used to have a lovely phrase, which is, if I have anything remotely complicated to do, I'll find the laziest person I know, because they'll find the easiest way of doing it. And that's the approach that we need to take. It's not about hard work. Hard work matters, but actually it's the invention, it's the creativity. And to loop back to the start, where we were talking about automation, you'll get different levels of prediction around automation at different time scales, when it's going to hit, which sectors it will hit. But the key thing that we know about it is one of the last things to go will be human interaction. That's one of the areas that actually we should specialize in. We are experts at the dynamics of organizations, at understanding whether someone is happy or sad and changing their day, at being able to walk through a corridor and spot someone and go, actually, they're not as perky as normal, take them for a coffee and find out that there's been an unexpected bereavement and they've come into work anyway. That's the space we inhabit, and that's not getting replaced anytime soon. But to think about technology in an optimistic way, one, you need to understand all of the different dimensions of what's happening. And that doesn't mean that you need to learn how to code, although it's not a bad thing, but it does mean that we need to understand the technology landscape well enough to take the opportunities when they're presented to us, to understand how we can free up people's time and capability. So quick test, could you all raise your arms, please? We'll do this as a closing thing, because this is the tipping point for technology. Right, I'm going to shout out, if you could keep your arms raised, if you'd be happy to say 5 hours a week through technology in your job, 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 25 hours a week, 30 hours a week. That's your job, right? And that's the interesting place that we're at now. We have the opportunity to use technology now to free us up to do more of what we love, to create more effectively, to genuinely drive value. But the challenge that we have is if we wait and the technology comes for us, actually our agency and choice goes down. And what I would love to see from the HR profession is more digital literacy, more understanding what's coming down the line, but also more partnerships with different bits of the business to understand what the opportunity is for us to genuinely help them become more productive, more effective. Because if we take that approach and we're on the front foot, then we are wonderfully positioned as a profession to make a difference over the coming years. If we're on the back foot and we wait for the change to happen to us, our agency is removed from that situation. So at the CIPD, we talk about the future work being human. And it will be if we exert our agency together, if we influence together and say, actually, this is how we would like work to be. If you leave it to market forces, if you leave it to organizations to decide, then it's up to chance. And you've got a choice in your actions and your decisions and the way you plan your work and the way that you think about the structures of your organizations going forward to start making some changes and some choices now. But just don't wait 5 or 10 years or they might be made for you. So the opportunity is there, step towards it. So my final closing thought around all of this stuff, because it's really easy to get pulled into it. Everything's going to be great, or actually it's going to be a struggle, is not to let the risk blind you to the opportunity, but also don't let the opportunity blind you to the risk. Thank you very much.